Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend the caller What If, back with the amazing fanfiction. This is series A What If Deku Became a Gangster. The Tokyo Central Police Station was a hive of activity like nothing seen before. First responders ran out the doors to save those still trapped in the debris. SWAT teams bustled about, either gearing up, down, or awaiting orders for their next assignment. Craziest of all, however, was the number of heroes gathered in one place, many of whom were lining a very particular hall and waiting in ready stances, as if they were expecting trouble at any moment. With who they were guarding, the thought made complete sense. It was to this scene that All Might, Principal Nezu, Aizawa, and Sir Night-Eye arrived to witness as they walked in the heavily manned door. All of this, All Might whispered as he stared at the maelstrom of disorder, for just one man. The former symbol of peace was powered down to his skeletal form, a badly fitting suit practically falling from his frame. The battle with All for One had taken the majority of his strength, and he now only had enough power for 60 seconds of hero work a day. It wasn't much, but he could make it count if necessary. Especially with what was to come. Outside, a fresh series of explosions sounded in the distance, the shockwave causing the glass in a nearby window to flex, but not break. Night-Eye took the sight in stride and responded, "That, one man, is more dangerous than anyone you've ever faced before, All Might." "Surely not more than All for One?" Nezu asked as their group carried on. By that point they'd reached the group of heroes, and after showing their ids to prove their identities carried on down the line. Each man and woman standing with looks of fear on their faces. Night-Eye nearly groaned at the sight. His vision of the future was becoming all too clear, no matter what steps he had taken to stop it. Infinitely more so. All for One, for all his villainy, was predictable. He was a bastion of physical might, but we knew what he wanted and roughly how he would go about getting it. That's how All Might was able to beat him. But this man, his power isn't just physical. It's financial, political, and metaphysical. Metaphysical? Aizawa questioned. The invisible webs he snared informants, spies, and agents inside. "I don't think any of you realize how damned lucky we were to apprehend him when we did, or how hard it is going to be to keep him." Any further conversation was cut off as the group reached the end of the hallway. A great vault door stood before them along with the chief of police. "Are you ready to proceed?" he asked. Nezu stepped forward and looked up at the grim man. "We are." "Very well then." The chief turned around and placed his hand on an imprint reader before leaning his head forward for an eye scan. Following this, he entered a 19-digit code in the reader before finally, the door swung open. It closed with a resounding clang behind them the moment their feet were clear. Inside was a smaller room, cut off by a two-way mirror looking into an interrogation chamber and another locked door. No one looked inside yet. Instead they turned their eyes to a pile of notes laid out on a small table and a fancy-looking black suit coat. "What's all this?" Aizawa asked, eyeing the items out of the side of his goggles. It was Night-Eye that answered. "It's everything we've managed to gather about the prisoner, but almost all of it is circumstantial reports and hearsay. Nothing that would stand up in court. We need a confession of guilt or his lawyers will tear us apart. It's been hell keeping them out this long as it is." "What? But we found him at the scene of the crime," All Might exclaimed. "That in itself doesn't prove anything, as no one saw him do anything illegal there. He could have just been a bystander. It doesn't help that no one else captured is willing to testify against him, or that none of the criminals we know met with him ever saw his entire face without a mask." We could argue similar facial structure mixed with a couple of other identifiers, but it's entirely feasible that with all of the contacts and favors he's built over the years he could even beat those. The chief cut in gruffly. What are you saying, Chief? I'm saying that for the first time I can recall, I have no idea what to do with a prisoner. Nezu looked over at the suit coat as his associates went over the documentation. Was there anything incriminating on his person? Nothing in his pockets but knives, cash, and lint. What about his augmentations? The chief flinched at those words. Quirks were readily accepted in this day and age, but body-altering surgeries were still frowned upon. Though distasteful, none were exactly illegal. As far as we know, nothing he's been chronicled as doing is. All we have is your direction and suspicions. All Might stood up then, Nezu and Night Eye flanking him. Then it's time we verified those suspicions. The three walked to the final door in the chamber leading to the interrogation room. Buzz us in. The others gave wary looks at the glass as the chief did so. None of them wanting to be the ones to enter that small a space with the suspected criminal. Once the latest door closed behind them, the heroes took their seats at a long table and stared across the expanse to a man chained by handcuffs to its surface. Contrary to his current circumstances, he seemed far from troubled. In fact, the calm folding of his hands and slight quirk of his lips implied amusement more than anything else. His green hair was long and wild, the clothing on his body fine and well tailored in the form of a black dress shirt and pants with a gray vest combo that exposed a healthy dose of muscular chest. But it was the eyes that caught most of the new guests' attention. The glowing red, robotic, orbs that stared into their faces as if they were capable of reading their very souls. Nezu cleared his throat and dropped a file onto the cold metal desk. Shall we begin? The villain's grin turned into a full smirk as he leaned back a bit in his chair to get comfortable. Why not? I've got some time to kill before leaving this shithole. All Might glared. You actually believe you'll be leaving this place a free man? He shrugged. Why shouldn't I? As far as the law is concerned, I've done nothing wrong. At least, nothing that can be proved. And I highly doubt you've come in here with anything new. Nezu cleared his throat to bring attention back to him and flipped the file open. We shall see. You know, it's actually a pleasure to finally meet you. Your exploits have been rather interesting to piece together. Most people would have thought them random, to be honest. But not you. But not me. The bear looked directly across the table to the haunting dead metal that made up his foe's retinas. I greet you, Moriarty. Or would you prefer the Crown Prince of Crime? The Napoleon of Blackmail? Kingpin? Or perhaps, Izuku Midoriya? The young man laughed deeply and jerked forward, the motion jostling his hair forward to cast his eyes in shadow. Izuku is fine for now. Oh, I think I'm going to enjoy this. What is? Izuku Midoriya stared at the vast drop before him, the tips of his sneakers already hanging over the edge, just waiting for the rest of him to follow. It was all for nothing. His life, his passion, his hopes and dreams. All Might was gone. He'd left 15 minutes ago after crushing what little hope he had left in his heart. The words he'd heard from his idol and countless others over the years just kept bouncing around his skull. I'm sorry, but without a quirk you cannot become a hero. All Might. Stupid Deku, you're nothing to me. Just a useless waste of space. Why don't you jump off a ledge? Maybe you'd be reborn as someone useful with a quirk in your next life. Kachan. I'm sorry honey, but there's just no way. His mother. Run away before he infects you with his quirklessness. Every student on the playground's growing up. Izuku, stop calling me I can't risk my coworkers here finding out my son is quirkless like they did in Japan. Do you even realize how shameful that was for me? His dad, look at that freak. He has no quirk, you know. Why's he writing in those stupid notebooks of his? Everyone knows they'll never amount to anything. I heard his dad took a low-paying position in another country because he was too ashamed of having a quirkless child to face his coworkers. All of his classmates. It was all just too much, and Izuku was too exhausted to bear it any longer. The one thing that had helped him to hold on all these miserable years was the dream of becoming a hero, of helping those in need with a smile on his face. But now, when the symbol of peace himself tells you there is no hope, what options are there? His only regret in the world was leaving his mother behind. She'd tried more than anyone else alive to make him feel loved and accepted, but it just wasn't enough anymore. Closing his eyes, Izuku released the bar that was holding him in place, and started to move his center of gravity forward, not wanting to see the ground coming up to meet him, but a second later something slapped into his face and he reeled back in shock, tumbling backward over the rail back onto the safety of the roof in the process. Once his heart stopped hammering in his chest, he rolled over and threw up everything he'd managed to eat that day. What had he just done? What had he been about to do? He started to shudder violently and curled up into himself. Did he really want to die? Did he? The thought kept rolling around in his head as his mother's face, smiling and happy to see him, kept slamming into his thoughts. How could he have thought to leave her like that? She would never forgive herself if he did something that stupid. It took a long time to get some measure of control over his body back, but when he did, Izuku sat up and for the first time saw what had knocked him back from the ledge. It was a page of wickedly scribbled writing. His writing. A page from his hero notebook then. It must have ripped free from his stuff when he landed on the roof with all might and then blew into his face with the wind after the fact. Taking a second to look it over, he saw it was from a fight he'd witnessed between the speedster, Comet, and the villain, Orichalcum. The speedster hero had defeated him with a supersonic punch that had cracked through his metallic skin and rendered his vulnerable body unconscious. The attack had leveled an entire neighborhood as collateral, but that had been beside the point as far as the papers were concerned. What really mattered to them was that the hero had been victorious once more. Now that he thought about it, Izuku realized that there were a lot of cases like that. Ones where the collateral damage didn't seem to matter to heroes as long as their quarry was brought in and they got the credit for it. There were even more cases like that for villains as well. Of course, the collateral could be set aside as long as justice was being done and the crime rate and villain numbers went down right. Izuku's mind flashed back to his room where dozens of other notebooks remained from years of similar battles. The villain rates were not going down. If anything, they were rising, most likely to compete with the number of new heroes entering the scene. The system didn't work. It was unclean, disorderly, and destined to continue on as it was unless someone did something about it. Unless someone took control of it. The green-haired boy took another look at his notes and smiled as he saw all of the ways that he'd thought of to deal with both the Comet and Orichalcum. This was information that he could use, that he could sell, and if given to the right people under the right circumstances, then it was the tool he needed to make a difference. With new purpose in his heart, Izuku Midoriya stood tall, the paper that had saved his life clenched tightly in his fist, and stared out across the city before him as the sun began to set. Yes, he was decided. It was clear that he could never be a hero, but maybe his world didn't need another hero right now. Maybe what it really needed was a villain. One that was capable of creating order out of chaos. But he would need a name. If he was going to be interacting with the scum of the earth, then he couldn't very well bring his true identity forth and let them find his mother in the phone book. No, he'd need a pseudonym, a stage name. Something to represent him in the criminal underworld he intended to rule. A memory came to him then, of his mom sitting him on her lap and reading out loud from her favorite Western story book, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. The memory brought a name forth. One synonymous with intellect, criminal mastery, and intrigue. Yes, Moriarty had a very nice ring to it. 1 hour later, Izuku didn't go home right away. He was late enough to make his mom worried already, so taking a bit more time wasn't going to make things any worse than they already were. He took his time, walking around the neighboring blocks, shuffling through alleyways, thinking of the best story he could give, the best reasons for why he was going to be gone as much as he was, and not applying for schools like UA as she thought he would. Or any schools for that matter. By the time his hour had passed, he had a plan and a story in his mind and ready for delivery, so with legs still shaking from his fading adrenaline, he marched the rest of the way to his building and climbed the stairs to their apartment. His mother ripped the door open before he could finish turning the handle, and the green-haired boy found himself wrapped in the tight embrace of Inko Midoriya as tears of worry fell down her cheeks. "Oh Izuku, where were you? It's so late, and you weren't answering your cell phone. I was so worried." Eventually she eased her hold and pulled him the rest of the way inside, only to take note of his severely dirty and rugged appearance. "My God, what happened to you?" Having prepared his story in advance, the greenette made himself look suitably miserable as he said, "Some stuff happened today after school, Mom." As he expected, Inko fretted over him like crazy after that, wiping his face with a rag, wrapping him in a blanket, and sitting him beside her on the couch with a cup of hot chocolate. "Tell me everything, I'll make it better, I swear." Once more Izuku felt a pang in his chest as if an arrow were piercing his heart. How could he have been about to leave such a wonderful person as his mother that night? And worse, without a message of any kind to explain why he did it in the first place. After school, Kachan and his friends ran after me. They burned one of my notebooks and beat me up before leaving me bleeding on the roof. The things he said to me, "He's not really my friend, is he, Mom?" Inko's face went dark at those words. It was times like these that she wished she hadn't left her hero days behind so she could go after that Bakugo punk with impunity. But no, she needed to stay with her little boy, and she'd never once regretted it. Besides, her sister was more than happy to have the limelight for a change. "No honey, he isn't. And I will be calling his parents and the school later. I cannot believe that none of the faculty noticed what was going on. What he did to you is unacceptable. Was that where you were all this time? On the roof?" "No." Izuku shuffled his shoulders and took a sip of cocoa to prepare himself. He really needed to sell this part, and the best lies were often told with grains of truth. "When I was able to move again, I went for a walk. I needed to clear my head and think about things." He looked his mother in the eyes and said, "I don't want to be a hero anymore. I realize now how impossible that dream was. Oh Izuku, I'm so sorry." Inko rubbed his shoulder soothingly as she listened to the rest of his tale. "I was ripping up pages from my notebook and throwing them in the street behind me, when this man ran up to me with a bunch of them in his hands. He showed me his business card, and apparently he works for an up-and-coming heroes support company. He read a few of my thoughts and ideas of ways to improve hero tactics and equipment, and he wants to hire me in an entry position right away." Inko looked troubled at those words, but she wasn't wearing the blank expression that usually precluded shutting him down. You're sure his card was legitimate? And what about school? She wasn't really sure what to think about this. On the one hand, her son was turning away from a life of hero work, one she knew from experience would see him dead or horribly injured. But on the other, he would be foregoing the next step in his education for a job she really knew nothing about. I stopped at the library after meeting him and Googled his company. It is legitimate. As for school, well, I can take distance learning courses online to finish my requirements while working if I have your permission. Mom, I want to do this. I can't be a hero, but I can use the information in my notebooks and ideas in my head to make this world a better place. Please, say yes. It all came down to those eyes. Those sparkling emerald eyes that had captured her heart the moment she'd seen them for the first time all those years ago. Inko couldn't have denied him if she tried. All right, honey, you have my permission. What do you need me to do? Thanks, Mom. Izuku grinned wide as a Cheshire cat and explained the process for mailing permission and request forms to the National High School Registry so that he could take his courses online, then explained that he might be keeping odd hours for the foreseeable future because of his new job. Inko hadn't liked that last bit, but she understood. She'd had to do something similar when she started working again after Hisashi had left them. He still sent some money back because they were still technically married, but it wasn't enough for abandoning one's family for no reason. Looking for babysitters had hurt like the dickens. 4 weeks later, Izuku was ready, finally. It had taken him a while to figure out everything he would need to create his presence in the criminal underworld and start off on the right foot, but he'd made a list and it was just about complete. First, he needed an outfit that would distinguish him and suit his need for anonymity. He accomplished this by purchasing a professional black suit with a red shirt and no tie and a face mask that rose over his chin and nose and ended just below his eyes. A businessman's criminal. A quick search of the internet and his own recollections had assured him that there were millions like him with green hair, so a head covering was far from necessary. Next was a professional place to set up shop. If he wished to create an image of the consulting criminal, then he needed to have an office with which to work out of. He had an image in his mind of a traveling office in the back of an armored SUV that never stopped moving, but that was a plan for later in his career. Right now he had chosen a decent set of offices in the seedier part of town. One where questions weren't asked, like how a high school-aged kid had the money to put a 3-month deposit down on office space and stock it with a fine hardwood desk and other furniture. To answer that question, Izuku had invested his allowance money wisely over the years and was tapping into his returns. It hadn't been hard really. With his analytical ability, he'd watched heroes that he was sure would become big names and invested his money into their marketing brands and toy lines. It was almost as if his younger self knew he'd need a nest egg to work with someday. That being said, he was far from supremely wealthy, so he was frugal in every way he could be that didn't relate to his appearance or bearing. Young as he was, he knew the power of a strong first impression. There was one step still remaining, however. A partner. One that could introduce him to the criminal elements of the city and vouch for his ability. There were 2 options for this. First, a low-level scumbag that had worked for multiple different organizations. Completely untrustworthy, and likely to turn on him for the right deal with the police. Useful for sure, but problematic in the extreme over time. Then there was the other option. The reason for which he was standing alone, suited and masked in a very particular alley in the narrows of Musutafu. The green-haired boy had paid strict attention to the news, followed the map of slayings, and compared his own observations in his notebooks about this man and had come to the conclusion that the serial killer would appear in this alley very soon. Not that the media had figured out he was a serial killer just yet, but he knew that was just a matter of time at the rate he was going. 4 deaths was a pattern, but heroes were in a high-risk profession, so no one was looking for that many connections yet. They would soon enough though. A slight rustle behind him had the teenager turning slowly, avoiding sudden movements, and coming face to face with the form of a heavily armed man squatting on top of a large trash bin looking down at him with a jagged katana bared and ready. The hero killer Stain stared at the solitary figure and said, "You've been waiting there for a minute now. What are you waiting for?" "You," Izuku stated simply. Stain nodded, having assumed as much. "You in that much of a hurry to die? You seem a bit too young to have done enough to warrant my blade." Smothering the nerves in his stomach, those words set rolling with an iron fist of will, Izuku said, "I've been studying your work, Stain, and I have an offer that I think you'd be very interested in hearing." The serial killer eyed the smartly dressed young man and against all odds found himself chuckling at the absurdity of the sight before him. What kind of teenager actively seeks out a monster like him? I highly doubt that, boy. I thought you might say that. So saying, Izuku reached into his pocket and threw an object from inside it to the hero killer. "What's this, kid?" he asked as he unfurled a piece of paper wrapped around a crimson vial. Leaning against a nearby wall, Izuku said, "A vial of my blood, and a taste of the product I am planning to sell." At Stain's startled look, he elaborated a bit. "Yes, I've figured out how your quirk functions and I am effectively giving you the perfect way to kill me. This is insurance for you that I am meeting you now in good faith." That page details the information on a corrupt hero by the name of Lamplighter. He's responsible for ungodly amounts of collateral damage and has never once paid reparations. I have listed on it his strengths, weaknesses, and no less than 4 possible strategies for taking him out with the smallest chance of civilian death and collateral. I am giving this to you knowing that you will use it to take his life." Stain was speechless. The information on the page was exactly what someone like him needed to remove this blight on the hero society they lived in, but he was confused. "You'd just give it to me? Like that? Why? So I'll come back and buy more info from you." The masked teenager shrugged a bit before gesturing to some wall space next to him. Stain thought about it for a few moments before shrugging and hopping down to stand next to him instead of above him. "You gonna explain now?" "Yes." Izuku nodded. "Stain, I think you and I are a lot alike. We both have a vision in our minds of what this world could be, and we both see how dark and corrupt it really is. You think the only way out is to simply remove the bad eggs, and I am not slighting that idea in the least, as it has the possibility of being adequately effective. For a time, however, I have thought of another way to accomplish the same goal. A way to ensure that this broken society we live in can be fixed once and for all. However, it requires the aid of someone with your expertise." The hero killer had started this conversation mostly out of boredom. His latest target hadn't kept to his usual patrol pattern and was instead spending time with his second mistress, so he'd been intent to just wander around and find a mugger or thief to stick with his blade. Instead, he'd found a masked chump in a suit looking for all the world like he was waiting for someone to fuck up his day. He'd approached him intent to have a simple conversation or end him, but now he was facing a boy, no, a man, with words of pure conviction coming out of his mouth, and it was astounding. "Before you say anything else, I need to know what set you on this path, kid. What set you in motion? If I'm to consider anything further you have to say, then I need to understand you." Izuku looked into the middle distance as his mind drew up painful images from the scrapbook of his life. I was born quirkless and suffered for it endlessly. But even then I held out hope that I could become a hero of justice. Protect this world in my own way with a smile on my face, you know. But then I met my idol, a hero amongst heroes, and asked him point blank if it was possible for someone like me. Do you know what he said? Stain could guess. Probably the same thing that had happened to him so long ago when the usefulness of his quirk had been cast aside. I'm guessing no. You'd be right. That was the last straw for me. I got on a roof, put myself on the edge, and believe me, I was ready to jump. What stopped you? A circumstance you wouldn't believe if I told you, but in that moment when I was sure I would die and then didn't, my life flashed before my eyes. I saw the weakling that I was, the broken world I lived in, and all the faults that no one seemed willing to acknowledge. Do you know what it is, Stain? To stand upon that edge, to stare into the abyss. The vigilante nodded stoically. That I do. If no one else wants to step up and fix the problem, then I will. The hero killer fingered the vial of blood in his left hand and tapped his boot with the sword in his right. All right, you've got my attention. What is this plan of yours and how do I fit into it? I'll answer the second question first. From you, I need a partner, contact, and teacher. The fuck? Behind his mask Izuku couldn't help smiling. It was a strange thing, flabbergasting someone as stoic as the hero killer. This enterprise is going to be intense to say the least, and there are going to be places that no matter what I may wish I will not be able to go. I need my partner to be able to do so. To do the things I cannot. I also need that man to serve as a contact to some other darker elements in this city, at least at the start, so my name and product, my information, can become distributed in the ways I prefer and envision. Finally, you may have noticed from my build that I am not a fighter. I have never trained in the martial arts, and that needs to change. As my organization grows, my subordinates will need to fear me and I'll need to be able to make them. Stain was quiet for several moments as he considered what he had just heard. He wouldn't lie, a full-scale plan to fix this fucked hero world they lived in sounded preferable to his plan of just killing everything dirty and rotten. At the very least it seemed more likely of having a lasting effect. And he wouldn't mind taking a student. Finally he said, "What is the plan?" Izuku turned off the wall and moved to stand directly in front of Stain. Crime can never be eradicated. History has shown us this again, and again, and again. In every society, in every country, in every age it exists. What is your point? My point is that while it can never be eradicated, it can be controlled, and more importantly it should be. Look around us, Stain. Look at the last 20 years. Quirks arrived, villains with them, and heroes rose to meet them. We glorify our heroes, raise them up on pedestals, but for all the work they do, has villainy disappeared from the earth? No, it is in fact increasing. By my count, every time a new hero graduates from one of the prime hero academies, a new supervillain enters the scene at the same time. But hey, they'll just keep each other in check, right? The scale's balanced. Wrong. As you have figured out, a great many heroes in our society are corrupt, or have let the fame go to their heads. Furthermore, the nationally allowed amount of collateral damage and civilian casualties for their battles to defeat villains are only rising. You're not saying anything I haven't already figured out myself. What is your vision for fixing this? A new system of checks and balances. A new scale. Me. I will provide information on heroes and villains to the appropriate parties at the appropriate times to ensure the rise and fall of those necessary to the continuation of society as a whole. This will include certain criminal bosses, allowing for me to take their place. Furthermore, I will branch into the political and economical arenas of this country to broaden my control and area of effect. In the end, with your help, I will control the underworld of this city. I will rule all crime with an iron fist, and only those with my permission will be able to act on their criminal plans. Stain was really liking what he was hearing. This boy not only had conviction, but vision as well. And the corrupt heroes. Izuku shrugged. Even a random cutpurse can kill a god if given a list of every single one of his weaknesses. Try it. I've given you that information on Lamplighter. Use it and come back to me when you have seen its effectiveness. Come back tomorrow night and I can have your answer then. I'll do that, Stain muttered before throwing a chemical caplet on the ground and disappearing in a cloud of smoke. The next night, the criminal aspirant returned to the same alley from the night before. Stain was waiting with what was clearly a bound human in a giant burlap bag and a huge smile on his face. That information worked out just like you said, kid. His patrol route was as predicted and I got him by surprise in the perfect place without witnesses. Izuku gave a deadpan look and pointed his chin at the sack. Is that Lamplighter? No, this is something else. The hero killer leaned the wriggling bundle against the wall and ripped open the end of the sack to display a bound and gagged man, perhaps in his early 20s. He was dressed in stylish clothes, had 3 earrings, and his nose and jaw had clearly been brutally broken. On the way to meet you, I caught this fuck in an alley trying to rape a girl 10 years younger than him. I thought I'd bring him along for a final test. Explain. I like you, kid, you got guts, and your plan makes sense, so I'm willing to go along with you and see how things happen. But before I do anything for you, or teach you anything, I need to know something first. What's that? Izuku asked as he stepped up to the man, already fearing he knew the answer. Stain reached into his belt and flipped open a gleaming straight razor. If you have what it takes to take a life and end a threat permanently. It's one thing to give the information to others and let them handle it, but I won't follow someone that lacks the conviction to finish the job themselves when the situation calls for it. And this one does. This fuck is a rapist. I caught him in the act and his pockets were full of condoms and bags of roofies. Had he finished tonight, he would have just gone on to do it again. This is a prime example of what we will need to rid this society of. For a moment Izuku held the knife in his hand and stared at his reflection in the blade. He'd known in theory that someday he'd need to kill someone, if only to cement his image with his future followers, but now that the moment was here, he found himself wondering if he had it in him to take a life after all. His mind flashed back to that day on the roof and he realized in a flash that indeed he did. If he was capable of taking his own life, why should it be so hard to take another's? Without stopping for further thought or hesitation, Izuku stepped to the side of the captive, took a firm grip of his hair to drag his head back, and slashed his razor violently across the expanse of clear throat. As the precious life-giving fluid launched across the distance of the alley like an exploding soda can, a door in the back of Izuku's mind clicked open, something dark got out, and a sickening grin spilled out across his face. Yes, he did in fact have it in him to take a life, and he found himself wanting to do it again. Beside him, Stain's eyes had a proud gleam glowing inside them. He'd been right about this kid. All right then, you have a plan, the conviction to see it through, and the will to eliminate your foes. I'll work with you as long as our interests coincide. What do I call you? Taking a deep breath to reel himself back from his newly realized bloodlust, Izuku said, Moriarty. Call me Moriarty. It had been a harrowing series of months. With Stain by his side, Izuku had managed to carve his way into the lower elements of the criminal underworld. It had been touch and go for a while. Clients had tried to cheat off of paying for his information, or threaten him for strategies that wouldn't turn them away from collateral damage as his did, but Stain had taken care of the early ruffians, and once he had been trained to a suitable extent with a blade, Izuku had dispatched with the rest. Soon enough the Greenette had built a sturdy reputation as the best information broker in the city, and one that was not to be fucked with. None of the plans and strategies he'd sold had failed yet. His clients all returned with glowing reviews and the fear of God for their supplier. The secondary response came from a series of repeated events that mimicked a very particular incident that had further cemented his place amongst his growing number of underlings. It had all come about at the end of his second week occupying his new office and doing business with those Stain helped him to locate and convince to hire him. As they had predicted, there were bad eggs amongst their clientele, and one such man was trying to renege on his part of the agreement. "I'm sorry, Mr. Orpos," Izuku had said to a rather tall and muscular bald man wearing a jean jacket covered in rhinestones, "but could you repeat that sentence?" The now named Mr. Orpos showed what he thought of the masked teenager's confident and superior tone by spitting a great big ball of snot on the floor, before answering. "I said I ain't paying you shit." The Greenette raised a bored eyebrow. "Is that so? Was the information I gave you on the Infinity Bank's latest security augmentations not accurate? Was your heist not a success? These plans had been provided out of all the possible banks in the city because the money in that vault was 100% insured by the government." Orpos nodded. "Yeah, it was great. Then what's the problem here?" "The problem," the crook heavily enunciated the second word, as if he were talking to a stupid 3-year-old, "is that I can't see any reason I should give my hard-earned money to a teenage runt that's shown no sign of any decent quirk in any of our meetings. You think you're hot shit? Well, I'm twice your age and the shit I've done would curdle the milk you no doubt still drink from your mother's teat, you damned child. So no, I'm not paying you. And for that matter, if you don't give me whatever other information you got on that handy hard drive of yours, I'm gonna make it my mission to make sure none of the other crooks I see entering this building do either. Reputation is everything in this city and I'm more than capable of destroying yours." All was silent for a while as the man known as Moriarty to all who entered that room seemed to mull over what had been said. In all actuality he was tapping a message in Morse code with his foot through a sensor under the desk to Stain, letting him know that his assistance was not needed. This bottom feeder was less than dirt, he just didn't know it yet. Then he leaned forward and steepled his fingers, a strange glint entering his eyes as he did so. "So just to be sure I understand this situation, you are not only refusing to pay me, but are in fact hoping to blackmail me. Do I have that right?" Orpos smirked, thinking that the man across the desk was just stalling. "Yeah, that's right, bitch." In contrast to his expectations of fear, or at least shame and acceptance, the suited man simply leaned back in his chair and groaned. "You know, you common crooks are all the same. Prideful, stupid, wearing a false sense of entitlement and superiority as if it is Kevlar. Just imagine the fact that your kind used to actually intimidate me, but no longer." Seeing the massive brute about to go into a rage-fueled deluge of insults, Izuku raised a hand, and something in his gaze actually stopped the criminal cold. Some survival instinct telling him that he didn't want to fuck with this person right now. "Before you start ranting about how macho and dangerous you are again, let me show you something." Izuku opened his shirt 4 buttons down, enough to display a thin electronic band wrapped around his chest. What is that? The formerly giddy Mr. Orpos was suddenly struck with the feeling that the situation was no longer in his favor, and had instead turned a full 180 degrees to the man he had spent the last 5 minutes insulting. This is a portable heart monitor of my own design. And this, he turned the monitor on his desk around to face his annoyance of a client, displaying the multitude of documents it held, is a list. A very extensive one. You see, my heart monitor is connected to this computer. This computer is hooked onto a cloud-based network, and that network is programmed to release everything it and my other hard drives contain to every police precinct in the country as well as every hero agency should my heart stop. Of course I could release it manually as well should I desire. What is on the list? The print was too small for the man to pick out, and to be fair, reading and writing had never been his strong suits. Though he was starting to get a sick feeling in his stomach. The suited dealer of death and information exposed his teeth in a grin so malicious it was almost a shame that his mask hid it from his prey. Oh, a little bit of everything. And by everything, I mean everything about you. You see, I don't go into business with someone unless I know everything about them. I know your real name, your home address, the route your wife takes to drive your kids to school every morning. I know all of your previous crimes and have enough paper evidence to put you away for life should it get out. Orpos moved to jump across the desk and strangle the young punk, but a lazy finger pointed at his heart monitor stopped him as the words spoken before registered in his brain with all the horror they entailed. If he did anything to this boy, this man, his life and that of his family was over. The implication was clear. Moriarty's death would release the files, and not just his own, but all the others he held. Prison was one thing, but how long would he or his last when every other criminal in those files would then get put away with him and have a rabid interest in putting down the idiot who got them all caught? I see you're starting to understand. Izuku's voice was a malicious whisper of victory, and against all odds, Mr. Orpos found himself shivering. No teenager should possess a voice like that. Look, kid, it's Moriarty. The greenette hissed. Mr. Moriarty. Orpos gulped. Mr. Moriarty, clearly a mistake has been made, and I will of course pay you the agreed upon amount. You'll do more than that. As of this moment you work for me. You will only take jobs I approve of from now on, and you will complete them in the manner I devise. What's more, a portion of all your earnings from now on will go to me via an account number I will provide you. You will take note of every person you work with or for and give that information to me. Do we understand each other? If you deny me, this information will be released, and only after your family has been shamed, hunted, and eventually killed before your very eyes will I allow you to die, slowly. Do we understand each other? Looking pale as death, Orpos nodded. That wasn't an answer. Yes. Yes what? Yes, Mr. Moriarty. Fantastic. You may go. He waved his hand, but just as the muscled idiot was turning the doorknob to exit the office, Izuku said, "Aren't you forgetting something?" Orpos blinked and turned around. "I'm sorry, sir." The criminal consultant pointed to the still drying mound of phlegm sticking to his floorboards. "You dirtied my office. Clean it up." Bunching his big hands into fists to prevent himself from saying anything that would damn him, the big man walked over and knelt before his mess, reaching out with an extended sleeve to deal with it before his new employer coughed into his hand, a somewhat strange sight for a man in a face mask. "Your mouth made the mess, so your mouth will clean it, bitch." For a moment Orpos thought about saying screw it, and killing the smug fuck across from him regardless of the consequences, but then images started assaulting his mind. His wife on the day they were married, his little boys on their first days of school, the heart monitor hooked to the method of their destruction. Like all criminals, Orpos had enemies, and the police were only the least of them. In the end, the crook didn't so much swallow his pride as he crumpled it into a ball so tiny you couldn't see it if you tried, and put his mouth and tongue to work on the wet floorboards. By the time he was done, the previously dirty space downright shone in the lamplight. Good. Very good. Now get the fuck out of my office. As Orpos beat a hasty retreat, Midoriya reclined back in his chair, put his feet up on the desk, and basked in the feeling of a job well done. At the same time he enjoyed the pulses in the floor that signaled Stain's congratulations for his methods. Orpos was not the first fool to try and intimidate him, but just as in his case, the others were assured that copies of their own dirty laundry would be distributed to interested parties should he be killed or arrested, and that they now worked for him, adding a small percentage of their earnings to his growing coffers, and experiences to his ever-expanding information bank. Some had surely tried to test his reins and escape his control, but a couple of sessions under his knife and a few missing fingers had dealt with that well enough. Now, a healthy business had been started, crime in the city of Musudafu was securely in his control, Stain was pleased with the progress, a strong cash flow was coming in, and the crime rates of the common criminals had gone down 15% citywide, showing that his methods were indeed as effective as planned. Everything was going well, and the earnings had been reinvested back into the market for a more than healthy return. Now the only thing that remained was to find a way to move further up the criminal food chain and expand the borders of his territory. Bank robberies, muggings, and henchmen looking for a leg up against their usual hero battles were one thing, but a serious foothold in the criminal element was another. True, he ruled average street crime, but to truly make a difference he needed to get in deeper. He needed a brand new product or service to draw the eye of the bigger bads and open a door. Something big. It was this thought that dominated Izuku's mind as the streets of Musudafu whizzed by the windows of his specially prepared SUV. The interior had been gutted, armored, and stocked with a custom desk, chair, and bolted-down top-of-the-line computer. His driver Ralph was under strict instructions to keep the vehicle moving at all times unless directed otherwise or stopping for gas in one of 5 approved locations. The man had been a career criminal, mostly small-time work, falsely convicted of murder by a competitor, and was set to spend the rest of his life in prison before Izuku and Stain had managed to track down, via a lot of torture, evidence that cleared his name. He'd been so grateful that he signed on with them on the spot. It helped that they'd killed the man that had screwed him. Yes, the green-haired criminal consultant had realized his dream of a mobile office. And as expected, he found the constant change of scenery out of the tinted windows to be conducive to advanced planning. The constant change on his routers through different networks he controlled also kept his activities from being tracked by interested parties, not that anyone was stupid enough to report him, yet. An idea, where could he find a shock of pink out the rear window caught his eye and he screamed to his driver, "Stop the damned car." Ralph hit the brakes and the special vehicle stopped on a dime. Moving his chair back, Izuku looked once more out the window to be sure his eyes had not deceived him. Yes, there walking down the sidewalk with a murderous expression on her face was a pink-haired girl wearing engineer's overalls and carrying a large box of what could only be weapons labeled, Mei Hatsume's babies of mass destruction. Izuku smirked, made sure his mask was in place and his suit pristine, and opened the side door. This person seemed interesting, as did those objects in the box. The Midoriya household, Inko was worried, and she wasn't sure what to do about it. Her little boy had made it clear 4 months ago that his new job would take him away at some strange hours, but now she was lucky if he came back to sleep at 2 a.m. And that wasn't the least of it. The way he dressed, walked, and even the timbre of his voice when he spoke was different. Her little boy was acting like a captain of industry, what with all his suits, and overly clear way of enunciation. And he never laughed anymore. It was worrying her. New job or not, his personality shouldn't have been that changed in such a short amount of time. Then there were the physical changes. His face, once so kind and expressive, was closed off, always serious and calculating with everything he looked at. His body, once svelte and innocent, had filled in with trim muscle that pushed the bounds of his t-shirt's abilities to contain. He'd had to buy an entirely new wardrobe, with money that came from who knew where. Now Inko wasn't a fashion connoisseur, but she knew quality when she felt it, and holding the material in her hands after cleaning it made it clear that her boy was spending enough to cover several months of their rent on the suits alone. No entry-level position, no matter how prestigious, paid enough to cover that. Something strange was going on, but she didn't know what, and she wasn't sure how to bring it up. She could always ask Izuku about the changes she'd been noticing, but she just had the feeling he'd brush her off. He was getting a little too good at doing that. Oh, if only she still had her hero contacts from the old days, she could run a search on the company he claimed to be working for, but when she turned in her credentials all of her access had been frozen. She looked at the clock. It was already 3 hours past when he said he'd return for dinner. Making a spur-of-the-moment decision, she got up and proceeded to do something she swore to herself she would never do. Act like her own mother and violate her child's privacy. Though her boy wasn't home, she still tiptoed down the hall. Guilt made her act guilty. Izuku's bedroom door was locked. He never used to do that, but she had a master key and used it to great effect, granting her entry. Flicking on the light switch caused her to stop and stare for a moment. The room, once covered in lovingly decorated All Might posters and memorabilia, was barren. The posters gone. The toys and action figures disappeared. All that remained was his bed, desk, a couple of screen-locked computers, and a massive map of their city and the wider Tokyo area. Several points were marked with strange symbols, but without a legend she could not make hide nor hair of it. Having already gone that far, she braced herself and began snooping. There were no loose floorboards. The desk drawers contained only loose sheets of stationery and pencils. Where had all of his precious notebooks gone? His closet held enough quality suits to stock an office of Ivy League stockbrokers, but it was the bed that truly shocked her. She lifted the mattress and found rolls, literal rolls, of $100 bills clumped together at the 4 corners of the bed frame. She took one out and slowly began to count the individual bills when a cold voice asked, "Have you seen enough?" Inko dropped the roll in surprise and turned to face her son, highlighted in the doorway by the glow of the hallway light. His eyes were strangely closed, but for the first time in months he was showing a true facial expression. Betrayal. Izuku, darling, this isn't what it looks like. It looks like you broke into my room and invaded my privacy. His tone was full of plain disbelief. Never in 100 years could he have imagined this happening. Not from her. No. Inko stood to her full height. She was still shorter than her son, but she wouldn't be guilted for worrying about him. You've been acting so different lately. Your attitude, these clothes, I'm worried. Honey, I googled the company you work for and I can't find them anywhere. That's because they're still starting up and building their clientele. When I said I had an entry-level position, I meant I was getting in on the ground floor. Izuku stepped into the room and took his mother's hands in his own. Have I ever given you a reason to distrust me? For a moment Inko faltered, but then she looked back at the money hidden in the bed frame, more than she had ever seen in one place, and she had to know. No, but Izuku, I'm worried about you. You're not the same, and that money, you can't look me in the eye and say that's from your job. And those clothes are worth more than this building. Izuku sighed before lowering his mattress back down and taking a seat, beckoning his mother to join him. When she did, he took her hands once more, still not opening his eyes. This was going to be difficult. He knew he needed to assuage her fears without giving anything away. For a moment he idled with the thought of getting angry and going on the attack about her lack of trust and making her feel even more guilty for not believing in him, but the instant that thought reared its head he stamped it down. Hard. This was his mother. The only person on this earth he loved. The only one that had been there for him in the dark times, the lonely times, the ones when only her loving embrace and home cooking had kept him going. Even the slight guilt he'd clearly already caused her with his earlier accusation was eating him alive. He'd done a lot of, really, bad things recently, but he wasn't a complete monster. Settling on his story, he said, "There are clearly some issues here, so let me explain." "Honey, why won't you open your eyes? I'll explain that too," but at the end, he gulped, hating lying to the woman that had given him life. He decided to start with a truth to soften the blow. "You say I'm acting different, there's a reason." He'd never planned on revealing this to her. He knew how much it would hurt. That day when I came home late, covered in bruises and got the job offer, something else happened. With growing fear in her eyes, Inko asked, "What happened, baby?" Bracing himself, Izuku said, "I tried to kill myself." As his mother gasped, he said, "Kachan, no. Bakugo had beaten me half to death," laughing the whole time. "And then, I met All Might." "All Might? Mom, please. This is really hard to talk about." "Of course, honey. I got him alone and asked him point blank, could I be a hero like him without a quirk? He said no. He told me to get a job as a policeman and leave actual hero work to those with the ability to do it." He left and things got dark. My hero, my idol, the image of what I dreamed of becoming had crushed the last shreds of my dream beneath his boot. So I got on a roof. I stepped up to the edge and I was about to jump, but then, I thought of you. Of what my death would do to you, and I couldn't do it. I stepped back, got sick, and just wandered around for a while until I managed to put myself back together. Do you understand now? I couldn't be the same person after that. I needed to change and become someone different than what I was, because who I was someone willing to do something he couldn't take back." Inko stared in horror at her little boy, picturing his body crumpled and broken on the pavement. In a flash she had pulled him into a hug, not caring how big he was, as she drew him into her lap and kissed his forehead, not even trying to stop the tears from falling. "Were you ever going to tell me?" "No," he admitted. "I knew it would hurt you and I was working on it. As for the clothes, I bought them with my money." "Where on earth did you get that much?" "I've been investing my allowance for years on hero merchandise companies. I'm good at spotting up and comers and the returns have been really good. I added my earnings from the new job to it and it's been really lucrative. Some of my coworkers saw how well I was doing and started paying me to do the same for them. So I guess I'm moonlighting as a stockbroker too. As for the suits, well, I've learned in business image kind of matters." Finally finding a hold on her tears, but unable to keep from sniffling, Inko asked, "Why do you keep all the money here?" "I don't trust banks. They get robbed all the time." Inko couldn't argue with that. And everything he said made sense. "I'm so sorry you went through that. And even more so that you felt like you needed to hide it from me. I love you, Izuku, and you can always tell me anything." "Well, if you mean that." He slowly opened his eyes, and Inko came face to face with crimson irises in place of his usual green. What is that?" "My company hired a new support tech mechanic fresh out of UA. She had a lot of great ideas and one of them were optical implants. They're capable of night, thermal, and X-ray vision. Additionally, they work like a portable computer, offering me instant access and visual optics to the internet and all of my files." "What exactly does that mean, honey?" "My vision is above perfect and I'll always have my information on hand." Trying to be supportive in light of the bombshell she had just heard and the delicate state she knew her son must be in after delivering it, Inko said, "They look very nice, Izuku. I do wish you'd talked to me before getting such an invasive surgery though. It was perfectly safe, Mom. May is a fantastic mechanic and she knew exactly what to do to make it as painless as possible. They feel like my real eyes did. I feel like she's going to go far at work." "So she's a girl then?" Izuku blushed. As hard as he was still figuring out how to deal with cute girls. A fact that cracked Stain up to no end. He mostly relied on his Moriarty persona to function, but he couldn't keep that up with his mom. "Yes, but that has nothing to do with it." "Sure it doesn't, honey." For a long time the two just sat together, holding each other, but eventually the timer on the oven sounded and they had to get up or risk the turkey burning to a crisp. Before standing she admitted, "Izuku, I don't know what to think about all of this. It's all so strange and different. You'll tell me if something is truly wrong though, won't you?" She cupped his face. "I don't want to find you on that roof again, or worse, splattered on the ground." The boy flinched in her palm at the memory. "Trust me, that won't ever happen again. It took a while but I finally found my place. I know who I am and what I want to do. I'm better now." "If you say so, honey. I'm going to get the food ready. I had to keep it warm in the oven since you were so late getting back." She stood to leave but stopped at the door. She needed to let him know one more time. "I love you, Izuku." And then she left, closing the door behind her. She didn't go directly to the stove however. She knew her son, and knew that he would want to take a shower before sitting down to eat. That gave her at least 5 to 10 minutes. Entering the kitchen she pulled her cell phone from her purse and dialed a very particular number. 3 rings later and a familiar voice answered. "Hello, Fubuki?" she asked. The voice was familiar but it had been years since the two had actually spoken. "Tatsumaki." "Wait, no, you changed it to Inko." "Sorry, big sis, I forgot after all this time." "It's all right, honestly. Look, I know it's been a while, and there were good reasons for the radio silence, but something has happened with Izuku and I need to talk about it with someone. There's no one else I trust more than you. Little Izu. I haven't seen that cute little guy since he was a baby." "What happened?" Gulping for a moment, Inko braced herself and said, "He tried to kill himself. And now, I'm not sure he's lying to me but he's definitely leaving things out when we talk. Can we meet up and talk about it? I need to get it out there and know I'm not crazy." Silence on the line, and then the strained voice of her little sister said, "Meet me at that old coffee shop we used to go to in Tokyo tomorrow, and you can tell me everything." "What about your hero work? Don't you have sidekicks to train? I'm not on call tomorrow and I have friends that can handle the brats for me. If my kid nephew is in trouble, that takes priority. Inko released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Thanks, little sister. See you tomorrow. Inko had been sitting alone at a little hole-in-the-wall cafe for 10 minutes, nervously sipping an espresso, watching the other patrons, and wondering how her meeting was going to go. She and Fubuki had not always gotten along well. Her own powers had manifested early in life and she had been praised, lauded, and sent in for advanced treatments and experiments that made her even more powerful. Her younger sister meanwhile was put on the sidelines. The entire situation had led to a lot of suppressed resentment that only got worse when they started competing for positions in the hero rankings. Things between them had gone from bad to worse and estrangement was well into view when he arrived. Saitama, a bald-headed man with the power of a god. The man could have been the greatest hero in the world, but he just didn't have the drive. Instead, he spent his time getting to know his fellows in the lower ranks and saving the world in his own way every day. Inko had thought about pursuing him romantically for a while, but in the end had come to the conclusion that they didn't have a lot in common. That being said, she would always be grateful to him. Saitama was the one that finally beat it into her head how badly she was treating her sister, and literally forced the two of them to spend time together and mend bridges. The bond they formed as a result was one of the best in her life. For the first time she had someone she could trust implicitly. Then came Izuku. She loved her son more than life itself, but he had been an accident. The doctors that had enhanced her abilities had made it clear that as a result of her treatments she would never be able to have kids. Her parents had been the ones to approve those treatments and she'd cut them out of her life when she got that news. But then she had met Hisashi, and he was fun, charming, and didn't care that she was a big-shot hero. It was nice. She only wished she knew how he would have turned out back then so she could have kicked him to the curb earlier. They'd been together for 4 months when she missed her first period. At first she thought it a fluke, but then the second went by and Fubuki convinced her to see a new doctor. That visit had been both the happiest and scariest of her life. Dr. Monroe had informed her that against all odds she was indeed pregnant, but that her body chemistry would not allow her to carry the child to term, unless she undid what had been done to her all those years ago. The hospital brought in experts. Recovery Girl herself lent a hand. By the end she was powered down to the level of an average C-rank hero, but her pregnancy was going smoothly and she'd never been happier. Fubuki stepped up to take her place in the rankings. Hisashi did the honorable thing and married her, and to keep her little one safe from the enemies she'd made during her career at the top she changed her name and moved the family to Musutafu. Civilian life took some getting used to, as did forcing herself not to call her sister daily, but seeing her darling son smile made everything worth it. The only downside was a nagging worry that haunted her very dreams. What if the surgery that had depowered her had also taken her boy's potential quirk with it? It wasn't long after her hurried retirement that the hero ranking system turned into what it was today. Her thoughts were interrupted, however, when the chair next to her slid noisily back and a tall, trim woman sat beside her. Big sister, Fubuki. Inko shot out like a cobra and pulled her baby sister into the warmest embrace she could manage. Oh, how I've missed you. She rocked her younger, yet annoyingly taller, sister back and forth, regardless of her struggling for several moments, trying like hell to impart her years of love and affection before finally letting her go to look at her. Unlike herself, Fubuki didn't seem to have aged a day, except for a few new lines around her eyes. She was still beautiful, athletically trim, hugely busted, and apparently was continuing to wear that god-awful white fur coat over her standard green dress. Her sister was apparently having different thoughts. Tatsu Inko, you look so different. Yeah. Inko nervously moved a few stray strands of hair behind her ear. Motherhood, housekeeping, and providing for your family tend to do that to a person. I guess I finally grew up. I'd say so. The taller woman rubbed her sister's arm affectionately. Though she'd never admit it to others, she'd missed the woman dearly. The look suits you. You are far more approachable in that comfy sweater than you ever were in that leotard dress. Hey, it was a statement piece. Inko joked. A statement of what? That you were flat-chested. I was a late bloomer, you know that. And I had a fantastic ass. The shorter woman playfully grumbled. By the way, how is that husband of yours? Fubuki blushed and hurriedly ordered a black coffee before answering. Saitama is good. I had him last month, so now he's off in Puerto Rico with Monster Princess Dues for this month. Really? So who has him after her? Mizuki. They'll be in China. It was a strange relationship that existed around the fabled One Punch Man. It had taken a long time for people to notice, and of course his sidekick Genos had been the one to finally figure it out, but the man was utterly and completely depressed. Though he hid it behind a false demeanor of humor and good cheer, he had reached the pinnacle of human ability and he was bored. Bored with hero work, bored with life, bored with everything. There was no challenge in anything he did and no one to offer him a decent fight. He had wanted to be the strongest being in existence, and he'd gotten his wish. However, in the process he had also lost everything that gave his life meaning. It was clear he was on a steady road to self-destruction, so the people that cared about him, especially the women, banded together to help him. They took him on trips, showed him different places, hobbies, foods, lifestyles, and helped him find something new to live for. In the process, love had bloomed, in multiple places. Rather than fight tooth and nail to be his one and only, the women in his life had agreed to share him and work together to keep his life fulfilling, full of love, and happy. Now he spent his days visiting his wives all over the world, helping where he could, and just living his life to experience new things and foods while keeping up his annoying hobby of looking for good grocery deals. It helped that no one ever gave him the credit he deserved in the press, so the One Punch Man was still only known in the country of Japan. And even then only as a B-rank hero. I still don't fully understand your relationship dynamics, Fubuki, but you seem happy, so I'm happy for you. Thanks, big sis. But we aren't here to talk about me. Inko looked away. No, we're not. I'm sorry. I wish I was, but I got so used to not calling in. Hey, the taller woman took her sister's hand in her own. You were getting death threats. I understand why you had to leave. Your child needed to come first. But most of those men were captured. I should have called sooner. Maybe if Izuku had had someone else to talk to besides me he wouldn't have. Inko couldn't take it anymore and broke out into a wave of tears that was only stymied by her sister lovingly pulling her close and offering comfort. She just held her in her arms until she calmed down enough to talk again. Tell me what happened. So she did. Inko told her everything she had found out and everything her son had said to her. When she finished, Fubuki quietly drummed her fingers on the table for a few moments as she organized her thoughts. It's hard to believe All Might actually said that to someone, but he always was overly full of himself. Was Bakugo ever arrested for what he did? No. I called the school and the police, even showed them pictures of the damage he did to Izuku, but the security cameras were conveniently under repairs that afternoon, so there was no proof besides my boy's statement. No officer was going to arrest a future UA student on the word of a quirkless child. You're certain about the amount of money you saw? Yes. Are you absolutely sure his eyes were completely robotic? And did he seem to have any problems with them? I know my son's eyes, Fubuki, and those were not them. By God, they were glowing red. And no, he seemed just fine with them. He even walks around with his eyes closed sometimes just to prove he can see through his eyelids. Fubuki continued to think for a while longer before saying, I'm going to investigate a bit more, but Inko, I don't think your son is working for a new hero support company. I knew it. Wait, let me finish. I think he's running it. The older woman blinked a few times. You can't be serious. He's only 15. Younger men than him have started companies before and been successful. If everything you've told me about him is true, then his intellect is off the charts. Let's look at the facts. His old dream was crushed, and he needed to reinvent himself. He needed to feel powerful, and a position of authority in a company he starts would provide that. He stays out at all hours, almost as if he's doing everything he can to get things off the ground. He has an obsession with how his image is being seen, as if he constantly has to prove himself to older and more experienced businessmen. He has vast amounts of money on hand that could easily be a result of his venture taking off. Finally, the eyes. The apparently very well crafted and installed mechanical optics. New workers are not given perks like that, but high-ranking associates could be. Is it possible that Izuku took his ideas and went into business for himself? He said he was getting in on the ground floor. Inko's eyes were huge as she considered everything she was hearing. It was all starting to make sense. What did he say the name of the company he was working for was? Fubuki took a pen and a piece of scratch paper from her purse. Brighter Horizons, Hero Support and Logistics. Inko mumbled, still stunned by the possibility of what she was hearing. Fubuki scribbled the name down. Good, I'll get my boys and sidekicks on it and we'll start snooping first thing tomorrow. This isn't in regards to a potential villain attack, so we'll need to cut some corners, but as long as no one looks too closely we'll be just fine. Are you sure about this? This sounds kind of risky for your people. This is for family, Inko. Of course I'm sure. Fubuki, if I haven't said it enough, thank you. This whole situation has had me worried sick. I understand, big sis. But, yes, if I have the opportunity, would it be alright if I actually talk to Izuku? Let him know who I am to him. It would be nice to finally get to know my nephew. Inko smiled warmly. Yes, that would be fine. He's old enough to protect himself now. He honestly should have been told who I really was a long time ago, but I was so nervous. Why? He wanted to be a hero more than anything, and when the doctor told him he was quirkless, that wish became an obsession. I worried that if he learned his mom was a former top-tier hero, and his dream didn't pan out, it would hit him even harder. Now, though, with a new dream and maybe a company of his own to run, he'll hopefully be fulfilled enough to understand. I'm sure he will. Now that the heavy stuff is out of the way, are there any men in your life, Inko? Fubuki waggled her eyebrows, earning a shocked gasp from her sister. Fubuki, I'm still married. PSH. You and I both know that means nothing here. You haven't lived together as husband and wife for years. So, any relations? Well, I have been on a couple of dates. Really? Anyone I know? The two carried on that way for the next 4 hours. Several days later, Izuku was simultaneously watching his city pass by through the bulletproof windshield and cataloging his latest info drop to his servers when a call started coming through on his phone. He quickly flipped a switch that cut off all sound to the driver and answered. "Speak, Mr. Midoriya." The hurried voice of his assistant at Brighter Horizons spoke up. "Did I not say I was not to bothered unless it was an emergency, Hisoka?" Yes, you did, and I apologize profusely for doing so, sir. However, our security has logged a few issues that they felt should be brought to your attention immediately." "Speak," he repeated. "A nondescript black van has been parked on the end of our block for the last few days. They rarely move, and when they do, our personnel have noted several men in suits hanging out inside. What's more, a bandwidth signal was intercepted leading from their van to a secondary location. What was transferred? Video and several particular internet searches. Show me." Izuku's eyes grew warm, and literally before his eyes he saw a fast-forwarded version of what appeared to be handheld footage showing men and women entering and leaving his offices. The searches were all about himself, his company, and who was listed as the leading personnel. Someone was digging into the particulars of his legitimate business. Well, there was only one way to handle this. Keep an eye on that van. I will be by presently to deal with the problem. Yes, sir, Hisoka replied before signing off. A quick dial later and the gruff tone of Stain's voice filled the line. What? Good to hear from you too, Stain. Don't be like that, kid. I'd just rather meet than talk in most cases. What's wrong? Does something have to be wrong? No, but I have the feeling it is. Smart. Your instincts are impeccable as always. How is that new sword made you turning out? Fucking fantastic. That broad knows her shit, I'll say that. Uwa were idiots for tossing her out like they did. Well, she did blow up an entire lab. On several occasions. I can see their hesitance to accept her brilliance and usefulness. All to our gain in the end. But that isn't why I called. You're going to need to take over the day-to-day operations of our scoundrels for a bit. Why? I have a temporary issue with Brighter Futures. Your legal business front, what's the problem? Don't you handle all of that shit remotely? Typically yes, but there seem to be some people looking into it. Probably just a bit of corporate espionage, but all the same it requires my personal touch. I'll need to go be Midoriya for a bit. Stain groaned. Can I at least kill some of the idiots that work for you? Not unless I say so. Until they break my rules, they're all good sources of information. I've been hearing whispers of something big for a while now, and I need them all in the field to pick up more intel. Fine. Go do what you've gotta do. I'll keep the rank and file in line while you're gone. Thank you, Stain. He hung up and opened the communications back to his driver. Ralph, take me back to the main office. I've got some stalkers to deal with. Right away, sir, was his easy reply, and they were off. A short time later, the van was exactly where his assistant had said it was, parked right on the edge of his block. Well, that just wouldn't do. A quick flick of the hand later and 12 security guards surrounded the offending vehicle, yanked the driver out of his seat, and opened the side door so the legitimate businessman could see inside. Yes, the interior was full of wall-to-wall surveillance equipment and 5 men in suits. Izuku cleared his throat to get their attention. Right then, I don't know who you are or who you work for, but I can already tell that whatever this is illegal. So here is what is going to happen. My men are going to rough you up a bit, your equipment is going to be trashed, and tomorrow your boss is going to come here to meet me and apologize for the inconvenience this little activity has caused me. One of the men sneered out, Why the hell would she do that? Izuku stared the man down. A few reasons really. First, my eyes are rather unique, and they have shown me that a good chunk of the equipment in that van is illegal for use outside of registered police departments. Second, I know for a fact there is no warrant out for me or mine, thus you are all currently guilty of stalking and trespassing, if the videos my men are currently relieving you of are any indication. Third, I am more than willing to release all of your internet search histories. At their horrified looks he said, "That's right, I have them all now. Damn, but I love my mechanic. Anyway, I'm willing to forget all of that and let bygones be bygones if your boss comes to me on their knees tomorrow and apologizes." He turned to his head of security and said, "Do it." Izuku Midoriya left to the wonderful sounds of fists hitting flesh and pain-filled groans. There was just something joyful about living in the world of cutthroat business tactics. The next day their boss did arrive, but it wasn't exactly what he was expecting. Izuku was sitting behind his desk in his office working on some paperwork, and more equipment request forms from May when he got the call. The top floor of his building had been gutted so he could use the entire space himself. The place had its own living quarters for when he spent nights there. Hisoka buzzed to let him know that a woman claiming to represent those they'd beaten had arrived and was asking to see him. Of course he directed her to be sent up to him immediately and he quickly got comfortable in his seat. All plans to deliver a scathing monologue about shady business practices and espionage were cut off however as his elevator doors opened and out walked one of the most stunning women he'd ever seen. What's more, it was one he recognized. The Blizzard of Hell. Someone like her would have no need or inclination to spy on his business, so why was she here? Regaining a grip on himself, Izuku steepled his fingers and asked, "Can I help you?" In answer, the woman stepped up to his desk and knelt before it. "You did say to apologize on my knees, right? Well, I'm sorry. There. You didn't have to hurt my men as much as you did." So they were hers then. Interesting. I'm sorry for that, really I am, but this is a cutthroat business and they were acting as spies. They were acting on my orders. Yes, but why? The woman stood back up, swiped her hands down her dress to do away with the wrinkles, and said, "My name is Fubuki, and I'm your aunt." For the second time that day, Midoriya blinked. Come again. The next half hour was spent with Fubuki recounting their shared family history, and the reason for his mother's change in identity, before finally explaining why she had sent men to spy on him. "They weren't meant to cause any harm, just confirm my suspicions that you were really in charge of this place. You or aren't you?" "Yeah, after I almost jumped I needed to fill my time or go crazy. This place was a backup plan I'd been thinking about." Izuku took a moment to just take it all in. "This is a lot, ya know." "I do." Fubuki smiled warmly at her nephew. There was just so much of her sister in his features. "But I'm honestly just glad to get the chance to finally see you. Even if I had to apologize to you first." Now that he knew his secrets were still safe, the crime lord leaned back in his chair in relief and said, "Me too. I'm probably gonna have some words with my mother about all this later. But for now I'm happy to finally meet you too. Don't be too hard on her. Everything she did was to keep you safe. Even with this situation, she was worried and she asked me for help to make sure you were all right." "Yeah, so what happens now?" "Well, we could get lunch and catch up with each other's lives, but first, any chance of seeing what it is exactly you do here?" After having my boys watch the place for days they weren't able to figure it out and I must admit I'm curious. It seems like whatever it is, you're making one hell of a profit. The boy genius smiled at his new aunt and stood up from his desk, buttoning up his suit coat in the process. For anyone else the answer would be no. But your family, so why not? He led the tall woman back to his personal elevator, punched in a distinct code in the side panel, and sat tight as they descended several levels below ground. This is quite deep, isn't it? I chose this building as my headquarters just for that reason. We needed it for safety purposes. And what would those be? Fubuki's question was answered for her as the doors opened to reveal a short hall leading to a heavy door marked R&D. We are a multifaceted company with many areas of focus, but chief amongst them are hero support and logistics. We offer never-before-seen support gear and battle strategies custom-built for heroes to perform at their best. Of course we also dabble in the financial market, but to be honest everyone else does too, so that one isn't so special. By then they'd reached the door, but the young man stopped them before opening it. I actually just recently found my new head of the mechanics division after she was let go from UA, and I feel I should warn you, she has a few oddities. Odder than a pair of red robotic eyes. Who do you think made them? Flashback. You're a super villain, aren't you? Izuku stopped short on the street and simply stared at the pink-haired girl standing not even 3 feet away from him. He hadn't even said anything yet. Just walked up to her from his still parked SUV. Why ever would you think that? Ominously immaculate suit. Mask covering enough of your face to be mysterious and intimidating, tinted-out SUV rigged with bulletproof glass and plating, no less than 5 knives on your person, and 2 silenced pistols strapped to the small of your back. You saw all of that in the time it took me to come up to you. The girl adjusted her grip on her box and pointed to her eyes. I have a magnification quirk. It lets me see the smallest of details, like how your posture is welcoming, not threatening, which means you don't want to hurt me. You're curious. Do you wanna see my babies? They're yours for the right price. Far from being freaked out or annoyed, Izuku was entertained. Something about this girl's frank attitude and bright smile were just infectious. Even for him. You think me a villain, yet you want to show me what looks like hero support gear. What if I wanted to use it for nefarious purposes? Who cares? May gripped his arm and pulled him off the street, away from any possible curious dog walkers. UA just kicked me out after only a couple weeks, so who else would I show all this to? I can't exactly use them for marketing myself anymore. Oh, my dear mechanic. Izuku cast an appreciative look over the girl's overall clad form. Her mechanic's jumpsuit unzipped enough to display a more than healthy dose of her cleavage. Why ever would they dispense with someone as lovely as you? She smirked at his gaze, her eyes missing nothing. Flattery will not get you a better price, Mr. Villain. But to answer your question, they didn't like me constantly blowing up the lab, working in the nude, or making weapons as destructive as I could. At his curious look she added, I like making things explode, okay? And the nude bit, I don't like clothes getting in the way of my creative process. I read once that Benjamin Franklin was the same way and the world has celebrated him for centuries. And I am sure they will you as well someday. So just so I'm clear on all this, UA let you go, effectively ruining your chances at a successful career in hero support. You have weapons you would like to sell, and you don't mind giving them to the other side. And you like to make things explode. She nodded. Let me see what you have. Izuku led the girl back to his SUV, she put the box on his desk, and as Mei spread out her wares for his perusal Izuku closed the door behind them. Once everything was laid out, all Izuku could do was stare. She had plasma pistols, mini flamethrowers, jet propulsion boots, and wrist hook lines that were clearly capable of rapid building-to-building movement. All of these items were astonishing, but so were a pair of robotic devices reminiscent of eyes. He picked them up. What are these? Oh, good choice. Those are my network optics, patent pending. Picture-perfect vision that includes X-ray, thermal, motion, and acts as a direct uplink to the internet, your cloud, and any nearby electronics. They have hacking technology and correlation software to match faces to internet searches. Install these babies and you'd have all the power of the internet in your hands, or rather, in your head. Feeling the full potential in his fingers, Izuku's hands began to shake. He wanted these. No, he needed them. What is your name? Mei Hatsume. What's yours? Before I tell you that, Mei, would you consider coming to work for me? I'd give you all the material you could ever need to keep building your babies. Her eyes lit up in excitement, but before she could say yes he raised a hand. Keep in mind that I am, as you noted, a villain. I will be using your babies for villainous things. What's more, you would be acting as my personal mechanic, which would mean you would have access to knowledge of my true face and identity, if only from the close proximity we would share. I would need to be able to trust you implicitly, which means no secrets of any kind. I would need to get to know you body and soul. An uncharacteristically serious look crossed Mei's face as she stepped forward and held out her hand to shake. In order, yes, you are a villain. I do not care. All I want is to create my babies and see them used. Who gives a hoot by who? As for working as your personal mechanic, she eyed him up and down and licked her lips, liking what she saw. I can think of worse things to spend my time on than putting these hands all over you. And I have to say, I wouldn't mind getting to know you better. You seem very interesting. Finally, all I have ever wanted to do is have a place to make my babies and watch what they can do. You give me that and I'd be willing to give you anything in return, including my virginity and firstborn. Only with a supreme force of will did Izuku hold back the blush those words evoked. He'd managed to do away with most of his shyness, but this girl was so upfront that she was managing to bring some of it back. It didn't help that she was drop-dead gorgeous and seemed to know it. So now that I've said all that, are you gonna give me your name and shake my hand? With one hand, the greenette took her extended limb in his own, and with the other he pulled his mask down. Know that in seeing my face in this context, your life is mine. To most I am known as Mr. Moriarty. To you, I am Izuku Midoriya. He pushed the robotic eyes into her other hand. Now what is needed to install these into me? Flashback end ****. You'll just need to see her to understand. Izuku smirked before opening the door and ushering his aunt inside. The interior of the R&D space was vast, and absolutely filled with shelves of new products, machinery, and parts. The back half of the space was devoted entirely to a testing range and a room-spanning workbench. It was at that bench that they found Mei Hatsume hard at work, in her underwear. Goggles covered her eyes as a plasma torch cut through a giant slab of metal. Aunt Fubuki, meet my mechanic, Mei. Sorry if she doesn't answer you right away. She tends to get very absorbed in her projects. With a dazed look on her face, the hero's eyes traveled from the beautiful young woman to the enormous subterranean space full of high-tech and expensive-looking machinery. Your mother is going to lose it when I tell her about all of this.